Good afternoon, everybody. It is December the 8th, 2022. The year is crashing to a close, and it is time for THCB Gang. I'm Matthew Holt, your host and founder and publisher of the Healthcare blog. And today, thanks to a couple of my friends for coming on late today, because we had some late chopping and changing, but we have Jeff Goldsmith, Health Futures Inc., Deven McGraw, who these days is in charge of data stewardship at Invitae and Citizen, and Brian Klepper from Worksite Advisors. And we're going to have a fun conversation. And Deven has lots of new exciting stuff to tell us, which he's going to tell us about hopefully shortly. So quickly, I will start. So Jeff was on last week, and he probably heard too much of this. And those of you who listened to last week's heard a fair amount of whining from me about my back and what I should do. I do have some little updates on the on how telemedicine is working, because I've actually had bizarrely 2 telemedicine visits that both work very, very well with pain specialists, people you would think wouldn't have had struggled to do a good telemedicine visit. So I'll talk about that if we get to there. But otherwise, we'll give Deven a fair amount of the floor here to talk about her new study. But why don't we quickly start? Brian, it's been a while since you've been on. What have you been up to? Brian, you still with us? You're frozen.
I am. I froze for a minute. I'm sorry.
All right, you're back.
I'm back. Okay. I apologize.
No worries. So I was asking you what you've been up to and what you've been looking at.
A lot of things: pharmacogenetics, AI, all kinds of companies popping up that actually do deliver better results and cost less money. There we go. Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea. My phone started to ring, so I would turn it off. All right, Jeff.
Well, I have a few writing projects. One of them is about the fact that there isn't necessarily a causal relationship between life expectancy in a society and the cost of that society's healthcare. It talks about how you can conceive of our country as a failed Darwinist experiment in social design, which is very expensive to minister to. I've also started a project on the overlap between the hospital and physician economic franchises, which I estimated about $200 billion a year, and what that means policy-wise. It's a major reason why hospitals are expensive, is because they've absorbed about 1/3 of the practicing physicians in the United States. So those are 2 big things that I'm working on. And then the third one, which I think you'll find amusing, Matthew, given the British reference, the December 3rd issue of The Economist has a piece about how there are 13,600 people stuck in National Health Service hospitals that are not acutely ill, that don't belong there, that have nowhere to go. And because there's no social care, there's no place to place them. And if you roll that number forward to our country, if there's rough equivalence, that means there's 80,000 people in the US right now stuck in observation units that are no longer acutely ill, for which the hospital isn't being paid, who have nowhere to go. And I'm working on an essay on that, about the medical version of purgatory that we've created for tens of thousands of Americans. So those are the 3
That's
things.
fascinating. Do you think that's happening in the US the same scale?
Oh, are you kidding? At the University of Virginia, like in my town here, had, the last time I asked, 38. So
Really?
that's
Not nothing.
a medium-sized health system with 38 patients with nowhere to go, for whom they're not being paid.
So these are people who are not medically stabilized, but are not acute. So because under EMTALA, Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, federal law requires you to stabilize a person.
Correct.
And you can't, but once you've gotten them to be non-emergent and stabilized, you can kick them out. It doesn't matter.
Well, you really can't if they die. You really can't.
Well,
I did read about a kid who was in a hospital in, I want to say Tennessee, maybe a children's hospital, who'd been there for a very long time because there was no foster care facility that could take her. You know, which I'm sure one of those types of situations, there was no foster care available that could take somebody with that level of health issues. Nobody, you know, there were no family members available. It was, you know,
Right.
there was nowhere for them to go. I'm sure that there's plenty of that around, I'm sure. Yes.
Well, and I think, you know, there's a big chunk of them that are schizophrenic,
Yeah.
whose families can't manage them, where there's nowhere to put them. I don't think it's just social care that's causing the backup. I think there are a number of factors that, you know, the person is a danger to themselves. They don't have family, or they do have family, but the problem is overwhelming, or they are, you know, maybe they are unstable and we have to continue caring for them. But there's a very interesting research project on exactly who these folks are, how many of them there are. But what we do know, some of them have been in observation beds for months.
And Jeff, we just have in New York City, right? I was just saying that the mayor and the are starting to involuntarily commit homeless people who they think have psychiatric issues. And what the hell happens, you know, when we don't really have a system for them? You know,
Right.
Nobody
Well,
wants to
and
see.
then so they're being forced into acute care hospitals, and then the policy community is going to turn around and excoriate hospitals for being expensive.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, and you know, there's a lot of, and then the obvious other angle of that is that we're now going to veer away from healthcare. Is that you know, we've done very limited adds to our housing, you know, development stock, and places where where they have a lot of, you know, you have a lot of homeless people on the streets with psychiatric illness, like San Francisco, New York, and LA. It's incredible, you know, the ability to build new mass amounts of housing has been incredibly poor. Although I did see an interesting study the other day that proved that even if you build incredibly expensive housing in Manhattan, it actually, and you add to the housing stock by adding, you know, stuff that's thousands of dollars a month, or you know, multi-million-dollar apartments that only a few who can afford, it still actually does reduce the overall cost of housing. It increases the overall stock and increases the overall access to housing. But you know, I'm always reminded of there's a great scene of in the Hitchcock movie set in San Francisco, not Rear Window, the other one, not High Anxiety.
Vertigo.
There's a famous scene where Jimmy Stewart, you look out the back of his house in the 50s San Francisco in North Beach, and if you look at the same view today, it's the same view. There's been no new building in that area for basically
Rear window.
All right, we're off the point of it. All right, so the other thing, couple of brief other things I wanted to bring up that may come up in the conversation today is that I've been playing around with a couple of these AI writing tools. GPT is one, Lexai is another. And I did it about a month ago, and then GPT got all excited. There was a lot of fuss about it on Twitter this week, and I did the same with GPT and Lexai AI. And what's amazed me is how much better Lexai got in just a month. It was, you know, the ability of it. And I'm now looking, and I'm sure we're all thinking about this. I'm looking to like turn one of these engines onto my own writing, so it can sound like me and not like a high school, you know, essay class, which is what it sounds like at the moment. But I'm pretty sure that when that gets good enough, which won't be very far away, we're all of us who spend a lot of time writing, which I think is all four of us, probably all out of a job. Hopefully, or even better, hopefully you can just like stick out. Maybe not. I'm kidding. That's certainly been a big fuss. And then the other thing I think has come up a fair amount this week because of the United earnings has been, I've seen a lot of fuss about the role of Optum, and you know, there's some fuss back and forth between some Optum cares and some of the practices that Optum owns. I know we talked about this last week, and how that is, you know, how they're interacting. And I think there's a couple of lawsuits between United as a pair and Envision, and yet Optum obviously has competitors to Envision, and so there's stuff going, which kind of feeds back into your world, your topic, Jeff, of how healthcare was going with, how hospitals are going with integrating with doctors. Anyway, let's all shut up, and Deven, tell us what you've been up to, because you've actually done some real work.
Well, this all sounds like real work to me. In fact, I'm really interested in reading Jeff's papers. I actually spent the very first part of my legal career, helping hospitals buy doctors' practices. So,
Oh, so it's all your fault.
it was in the early 90s. So. At any rate, so just yesterday, we released what we think is the first of its kind report from a company that leverages de-identified data for secondary uses. And we did a report on all of the data sharing of de-identified data that we did in the year 2021. So we spent this year obviously compiling the statistics, and maybe took a bit longer than would have been desirable because this is the first time we did it. So we had a lot of in terms of developing a process and vetting it and making sure that everything was included. And we released it yesterday, 75 pages. So that's quite a lot, but it includes, it is everything. And it was really a commitment made to our patients that we will, number one, we do give patients choices around whether they're even de-identified data that we're collecting about them can be leveraged for secondary purposes, mostly in terms of sharing externally, but also in terms of our own sort of internal product development type of research, where it's not just about improving our ability to do genetic tests. And we have internal processes to vet data use. But nevertheless, the idea that, there just has always been a black box approach to this kind of data sharing. And, a patient really, in addition to, in most places, having very little control over whether it happens or not, most patients have no idea. And so we wanted to take a step to break that mold. And to be, if not the first, among the first companies to be transparent about how we use and share patient data beyond a privacy policy. Privacy policy is just a description of what we can do. This is actually a description of what we've done. And we released that yesterday, and, starting to get some favorable commentary in. We'll see over time how it lands. My hope is that we'll do this every year. My hope is that it actually morphs into like a website where we don't wait till the end of the year to compile it, but we're routinely adding to it on a regular basis, so people can take a look and see, my data as a person who's received an in vitro genetic test, and I have, like, how did it contribute to improvements in science and in the delivery of healthcare? And then on the Citizen side, Citizen was just acquired by Invitae in 2021. So most of the data sharing that's reflected in this 1-year report is of the genetic test data from that side of Invitae. But there are some Citizen examples in there as well, which basically date from September 15th, 16th, it's 2021 to the end of that year. So we're really excited. Transparency is a fair information practice that you don't really see many companies act on. They're transparent about how they can share data in terms of sort of broad strokes, but not necessarily details about where people's data has gone and for what purpose was it shared. So that's what we've been working on.
Fantastic. So Deven, can I ask you a couple of things, because
Sure.
You're not only do your own research, you're obviously one of the leading experts in the country on this as a whole. So there are a couple of things going that have happened in recent days and weeks. One is that OCR, which you used to run, has come up with some statements about Facebook and it's not called Facebook, sorry, Meta. And also, I believe also Google and others, tracing the activities of people who come to their website. And it's a bit confusing as to what data was being shared between healthcare systems that were using their tools and Facebook or Meta or what else.
Yeah.
So I would love if you could explain a little bit about what that was and what the ruling was in that. And then perhaps the next question is, this research you've done is on Invitae and Citizen, your internal use of how you've worked with your patients' data and how it's been spread. But there's also, right, I mean, I just came back from health a couple of weeks ago in a wheelchair, albeit. There is so much activity by companies like DataBand and Clarify and Komodo and IQVIA, et cetera, about using data in a world in which now finally you have to be allowed to get your data via API from the law the regulations now say, after we talk about that, you can actually get your data. So could you perhaps talk a bit about the sort of the Facebook Meta thing, and then talk a little bit about the big picture, and then let's dive into it. And then after that, let's dive into what you.
Yeah, no, happy to. The recent guidance from HHS was actually not directed at Meta or Google at all. It was because HHS does not regulate them under HIPAA. They're not covered by HIPAA. What it says is, if you are an entity that is covered by HIPAA, so a hospital, a doctor's office, a health plan, a certified electronic medical record vendor, and you are essentially using Meta or Google's advertising model to serve targeted to have one of those technology companies serve targeted advertising to people who have come and taken an action on your website, you could be violating HIPAA if the type of data that you're transmitting to Google or Meta or any other sort of technology company whose business model is the serving of advertisements based on online behavior, you could be violating HIPAA if the type of data that you're sending in that pixel or web beacon that's web browser activity is actually PHI. So data like there were a number of investigative reports that showed that a number of hospitals had embedded pixels on their portals in the appointment area of their portals. And so what that meant was that the type of data that was being sent to Meta or Google was PHI. It was, this patient with this internet ID has signed up for a gynecological appointment, or is seeing this particular doctor, or has asked a question of this doctor, or who has gone to a website where the type of website is geared toward patients with a certain condition. So it's not just for general, I don't think it's for general website traffic where there isn't, who knows whether that person has a health condition or not. It's, did you go to Mount Sinai? I'm just pulling Mount Sinai out of the air. Did you go to Mount Sinai's general website? I don't think that's what's covered by this guidance. But if the type of data that's going from the web beacon or pixel that marketing probably for the hospital or marketing consultants more often than not have installed on the covered entity's website, and then the type of data that's going to Meta or Google for advertising, for serving of ads is identifiable, qualifies as sort of revealing that someone could have a particular health condition. That's what that was all about. And were some investigative reports, in fact, that found that a number of hospitals were doing this. There's now software that people can use to actually find how they're being tracked on websites and exactly what data is flowing to these digital companies for surveillance. So it is groundbreaking. There have been a number of lawsuits that have been filed against hospitals. HIPAA's not enforced by private right of action, but under state law related to the fact that I just don't think a lot of compliance offices think about like what the marketing department is doing with cookies on the website as potentially creating a compliance issue, but it does. So that's what this is all about. It's not directed at Facebook or Meta or Google.
Do you expect some OCR, fines, investigations out of, as well as this? Because they can, obviously.
Yeah, it's entirely
how bad
possible.
Things are.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. It's not clear to me from the announcement that they are pursuing such investigations. And, I don't work there anymore, so don't tell me this stuff. So I think it's possible, but it's also, I think back to a case that OCR had around television cameras in hospital emergency rooms, where they put out some guidance around, like, you can't let the camera people into your emergency room unless the patients in the emergency room have actually consented to being filmed. That there's a potential violation there. At the time when they put that guidance out, there were investigations that were going on of a number of institutions, but it's also pretty typical for OCR to put out guidance in an effort to sort of shut the activity down, and as like for a notice to folks that, okay, you are now on notice, and anything else we hear along these lines, we're going to feel pretty free to go after because you've been warned.
Right. So can I ask a stupid question here?
Yeah.
So is the appointment things that you make on my chart leaking out into this commercial environment?
It depends on whether the MyChart sponsor, which in this case would be whatever hospital, has put a
Right.
pixel on the appointment activity in order to sort of be able to do a more targeted ad, right? So think about the business possibilities, right? You make an appointment with an endocrinologist, they want to serve you a bunch of ads about their great endocrinology department.
Sure.
Right. So if they
Or
have
drugs.
a pixel, right, if they have put a pixel there, but I don't think it would be Epic putting them. Epic, I don't believe it's
No.
It would be the
But-
marketing department of the hospital deciding that they wanted to target with advertisement and have Facebook essentially do this targeting for them, or Meta, to put the pixels in places where you're getting fine-grained data about patients.
Right.
So there's definitely an appeal to being way more granular about where you put these pixels as opposed to on the general site.
Are people actually doing that, Deven, is what I'm asking you.
Oh, yes. There have been some investigative reports that have found it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's where this came from. And don't forget, in Facebook Meta's case, a little while ago, but Fred Trotter and others who are in this business, Andrea Downing, found that their behavior regarding private Facebook groups of patients with very sensitive information was bloody awful, and they never really fixed it. And that never really got fixed. And there are a lot of patients, in particular, sharing information within Meta. Not the same thing, not with an external third party. And there's been a lot of issues about that. So they're not exactly. And I think we can agree they're not exactly. They haven't exactly shown a tremendous moral fortitude around being deeply concerned about the privacy of their users. It's not something I would say that Meta Facebook is well known for anyway. Can we can I bump to the second of my two questions, Deven? I mean, a lot of people kind of know this stuff goes on, but don't really understand the amount of the use of, and this probably gets back closer to your report. I'd love to dive into your report a bit more. The use of data that is tokenized, in other words, and I think, I don't know if this is true or not, but I was at a startup in 2000 where I think the tech team dreamt this up, and maybe it had already been going on by then, where the concept where you could tokenize, you could convert the identifying part of a PHA into a token that you can then match if you found the same set of tokens, but you didn't know you couldn't reverse the tokens back, was something that you could do. So if Matthew Holt's data was found, on a drug company, on a drug claim, as Matthew Holt's data was found on a medical claim and then found on like a survey he did and whatever, and you tokenize it all, you could match it all and go, aha, this is a person of whatever, this is a white guy in his 50s living in Northern California or whatever, and has the following characteristics. So that business has grown. I mean, so the company I was in, someone came up with this and we actually put it in a preliminary patent and the company went bust before we could afford to do that patent. But I know that since that time, I don't know if I've been working on it back then and whether the patent would have come through or not. But since that time, companies like DataBank and others are doing this dramatically. So how does that sort of fit into the work you've been doing? Just give me a sense of what that business is like and how that compares and contrasts to what you've been doing at Invitae. Yeah, no, sure. So just as a conflict of interest disclosure, so I have a part-time advisor position with DataVant. I don't speak for the company, but I do speak to them from time to time about privacy issues, et cetera. So, okay. So the way that tokenization is the vehicle by which you can take de-identified data sets and link them across data sets. So if you have, health plan data and hospital data, and you want to merge those data sets, but you want to merge them in a way that the data remains de-identified, tokenization is the process by which that can happen, and that will allow for a richer de-identified data set to be reliably created across multiple data silos. So, and as long as the data remains de-identified, it falls out of regulation, just like, general de-identified data isn't regulated by HIPAA. It's typically not regulated by state law either. Sometimes the definitions about what constitutes de-identified data can be tighter than those in HIPAA when you talk about state laws. But in general, de-identification is like the golden ticket around health data, right? Once you sort of reach that status,
then the regulatory handcuffs come off. And so and de-identified data, while de-identification is not perfect necessarily in terms of completely reducing re-identification risk, it does create the very low risk, which enables a lot more utility out of data and more use cases than would be permissible under HIPAA, for example, if that data remained identifiable. So the way that that's related to the report is that we do, when we share data, de-identify it ahead of time. And so if there is the potential to use that de-identified data in a way that requires linking it across data sets for kind of more of a collaborative type of arrangement, that's the role that tokenization plays in that environment. And again, because the de-identified data falls out of regulation, very little is usually said about where these data go, who gets them, for what purposes. And so our report essentially identifies for the public all of the ways that we shared de-identified data, which we're not required to be transparent about, but we thought it was the right thing to do in 2021. And then we would intend to do that for every year. I mean, that's the hope. It takes resources to pull this together. So it's always a little...
You're saying you're not viewed as a profit. You're not viewed as a profit center for doing this. I get it.
Exactly.
So let me ask you then about, so what were the reasons it was used? And I'm sure there's and I've had a quick look at one. There are a bunch of them. And then let's talk about the ones where, in the end, you want to know about the human being behind the de-identified bit. So perhaps we could. I'm going to end at clinical trial recruiting, because that seems to be the biggest bugbear. Let's start before we get there. What else you used it for?
We cover that in the report, and that is one instance where, we don't share identifiable or even de-identified data to do clinical trial recruiting. We examine our own data and run, algorithms of inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then say we've got 10 people that qualify for this trial, and then we reach out to the patients ourselves and say, do you want to be contacted? Are you interested in hearing more? Do you want your data shared with this clinical trialist? So there's a lot of sort of internal use. We don't sort of share that data out. And then there's also what's called sponsored testing. So if a drug company is looking to test whether its existing drug is useful against a particular type of illness, maybe for label expansion purposes, but it's a drug that has a tie to a genetic condition, and we need to get people tested to see if they're actually eligible for testing the drug to meet that condition. Then sponsored testing is a section of the report where we talk about who has essentially helped us provide free genetic testing to people in exchange for their willingness to share their data back with the company in order to examine whether the drug is effective in treating the condition for which there is that genetic tie. And then similarly, looking at pharmacogenetic evaluations around, sort of whether a drug is effective in a certain population with a genetic marker. And then there's development of helping to develop better guidance around who should be tested for certain cancer diagnoses. So a lot of it is to inform public policy around who should receive a genetic test for a certain type of cancer in order to assure they get the right precision medicine therapy. There's some that are health economics evaluations, costs. So it really runs the gamut. I mean, for 75 pages, it's sort of crosses between sharing with academic centers, sharing with pharmaceutical companies, sharing with both academics and pharmaceutical companies, joint publications, joint posters, you name it.
So and this will be my sort of last question, then we should get into this.
Yes. No, I know. Brian
no, it's good. I know Brian mentioned pharmacogenomics when we started. It's fascinating, but the key bit seems to me is when you want to go from I have de-identified data, which is supporting research and what have you, to the point where I want to identify an individual. Now you're saying for clinical trials, you keep that internally. You're trying to identify that, but presumably once you get somebody into sponsored testing, the pharma company, if they think there might be a useful candidate for it, it might be a useful candidate for a drug, would be interested in, identifying them or the clinical research partner, who it is. You can imagine there's a lot that's going to go. And as we get better and better at sort of slicing and dicing the data, and these data sets get richer and richer, you can imagine that the interest in re-identifying these people, in a shared data set where you have the data has come from multiple places, is just going to increase. Where do you think we are there, and where do you think we're going to end up? And is this going to get hammered by legislation? Because this is
we
tricky stuff.
would have to have the patient's permission in order to identify them, and so we would seek that out before we would disclose that. But there is so much, commercialization of de-identified data sets that I don't want to undermine the importance of transparency just about the de-identified data sharing, because if you talk to most commercial companies that are interested in data, they don't want the identifiers until they reach the point where there might be a value proposition for them to be able to interact directly with the patient. Otherwise, it's too much of a liability for them, and they would much prefer to remain in the de-identified data space for as long as possible.
But isn't that the case that, the people who employ lots of lawyers like you, the pharma companies and the people who are scared of that kind of stuff, at some point it becomes interesting. That's fine. They have their CROs and third parties and data analytics companies, and they don't really want to touch them. They just want the answer. But at some point, somewhere there's an interest in figuring out who this person is for whatever reason, clinical trial, treatment, testing, whatever. And part of the issue, and this is something that Brian and Jeff, we should get you guys in on, part of the issue is that the more weird and rare these folks get with the different conditions, the more damn expensive they are to treat with the cost of the specialty medications and all that kind of stuff, right? That's going on at the same time here. So, it starts becoming very interesting to identify a few people, in some of those categories. Yeah. So what do you think is the sort of the zeitgeist at the moment about when you get to a patient and say, okay, we ran all this, you don't know this, you didn't know we had this data on you, but we did, and we now are interested in introducing you to our clinical partner or whatever, or our pharma company, partner. Is that kind of okay, or is that going to start freaking people out a bit, like when people figure out that Facebook knew all this stuff about them?
In general, when we reach out to patients, they're not sort of surprised. I mean, they had a genetic test done by us. If they're on the Citizen platform, they actually signed up for it. So it's quite different than a technology company reaching out to them and saying, hey, we have your data, and people not even realizing they had, digital exhaust that got leveraged for this purpose. There's usually some awareness. And so we don't sort of get, oh my God, I didn't know you had data on me. But if we did, and the person wanted to opt out of data sharing, they could. If they wanted to receive information about more opportunities, they could do that. It's kind of an educational moment, but I think the bigger backlash comes from just not being transparent with people at all. And then them finding out that, oh, your data's in several commercial databases and was shared with this pharma company and that pharma company, and nobody ever told you, much less gave you any choices about it. So
Deven, isn't the more frightening thing the fact that when there's very large sums of money involved, that people are going to stretch as far as they can? I mean, what will the stop loss companies do with this technology?
Yeah, well, it's what do they do with data? Because we don't provide them with any tech, and we don't provide data to stop loss companies.
No. Well, you may. I'm not pointing a finger at your.
Oh yeah, but I just want to make sure make that clear. No, but others do. So it's not because it's de-identified. They can't use it to do stop loss on me per se, but they can absolutely use it to set their overarching policies around stop loss, right? To the extent that the Affordable Care Act lets them do that. I think it's much more prevalent in the risk reduction, the insurance fields that are outside of Affordable Care Act protection. So disability insurance, life insurance, and things of that nature, where you absolutely can use health data to underwrite people and to set premiums and things of that nature. So they could do that through a number of vehicles. One would be a massive data set of de-identified data and just looking at patterns and trends and and figuring out how to set their risk corridors that way. Or frankly, you can't apply for any of this insurance unless you agree to share your medical records with these people.
Right,
so
right,
you're going to get
right.
individually risk rated too.
Yeah. I met with a stop loss company last week, a big one, and their worry was the new cell and gene therapies. I mean, that's the thing that they're most concerned about. And with, a new drug that's going to be $3.5 million, it's understandable.
Yeah, like sort of understanding the cohort of people that are going to be eligible for that drug. Yeah. And they do have the ability, even under the Affordable Care Act, to decide what they're covering and what they're not.
Right.
Particularly around the minimum, outside of the minimum benefits package. Yeah.
I kind of wondered about the 12,000 digital health companies that are out there that have engendered all these relationships with people that maybe don't have access to your level of legal expertise. There was an article.
Heaven's an advisor to all of them. You do know that.
Oh, there was an article in Stat. I think it was in Stat 3 or 4 months ago, maybe longer, about some of the mental health, digital health companies where people started seeing descriptive information about their personal problems showing up in targeted ads that were sent to them. And I kind of wonder, in, companies that are, scrambling to make their numbers and, to get funded and all the rest of it, whether, unlike a Pfizer or a Biogen or whatever, these guys have much lower standards and much more permeable gateways for information. And that, that stat article was really the tip of a very large, messy iceberg.
It might be, and I think you've already got a couple of examples, right? So Practice Fusion got dinged for essentially running this thing, which to promote, to enable doctors to promote opiates. They ran it before to promote. They built the thing to promote caps in care for vaccinations, but then when they got in touch, when life was a bit tough, and Purdue came along and said, "Okay, can you use the same tool to bump up the numbers on OxyContin?" That happened. And then it didn't get a lot of publicity here, but one of the text-based mental health companies, I believe in Finland or Sweden, got hacked. And, obviously there's an incredible amount of sensitive information in text-based chat between a therapist and a patient. I don't know what ends up happening with that. God knows, blackmail, who knows, if anything. But we're seeing something somewhat similar play before our eyes with our friend Mr. Musk and Twitter, given that there's a lot of private messaging within Twitter, and it's not very clear who owns that private messaging and what restrictions there are on it. And I'm sure I private message stuff within Twitter to people I know well that probably, maybe some of you, probably wouldn't like to see the light of day, and these kind of things that like the text that Musk had that got put into discovery as part of whether he had to buy Twitter or not. I think there's a lot that we don't think about that that could potentially come out, and this problem is just going to grow and grow and grow as the amount of communication online grows and the amount of data grows. And I'm seeing this I'm seeing lots of different facets of data coming up. And then when you start talking about, going back to the joke about looking, using AI to write blog posts, the other main thing about AI is to go and find patterns in information, right? And that's clearly, if you can do that on de-identified information, as Brian says, you can start hopping that fence much more easily, and then you start thinking about things that start costing a lot of money or make people very vulnerable. So I think it's an issue that will run and run. Deven will not be out of a job for some decades to come.
and
Brian.
And not to turn the conversation to this particularly, but it certainly does not vote. If we can't control something as basic as this, it certainly doesn't give us confidence about our ability to control AI and where that can lead.
Yeah.
I mean,
this to some extent, this is already happening, right? So there was an article not so long ago about a company that's now changed its name. Used to be called Apris, and now it's called Bamboo. Is that right? The company that does prescription drug management, sort of check off in hospitals. And they had an algorithm that was designed to sort of, try and catch drug-seeking opiate users or what have you going between emergency rooms. And there were a bunch of weird stuff getting caught up. Like there was one, I think this was an article in the Huffington Post, but it might have been somewhere else. But the algorithm, people were being denied drugs that they were apparently responsibly using because a similar medication had been given to their dog or something, and somehow that had ended up in the same database. And there's a lot of the sort of the power of the algorithm to approve and deny stuff is going to be, it's going to get with AI. It's obviously going to continue to go on, and there is behind that, as I think you just pointed out, Brian. I'm sure Deven, you've talked about in the past, is that a lot of these algorithms are proprietary, right? It's not like you get to see them and you get to figure out what's behind them. They're owned by somebody, and it's unclear as to how that can be, how you can get transparency into that. That's another big piece.
Yeah.
All right. Can we? So let's. That's been fantastic. Can we? I know we only have a little over 20 minutes left. So let's change the topic a bit. I want to start complaining about myself, but and I'd be interested in Brian, your take on this, because you've obviously been there was your name came up from me in a Slack chat I have with some people today. There's currently a lawsuit that I think Anthem is now being sued, but I think there's a similar one that's been going with Cigna and right, about an ASO working with an employer, an ASO like an Anthem or a Cigna, remember, working with an employer and essentially getting a better deal from the provider, but billing the employer full price. I think that's the implication. And also there's implication there that there's also been, essentially because the ASO is not at risk, they've also been sort of some unnecessary costs and some unnecessary stuff going on. And speaking as somebody who may or may not be about to have an unnecessary or potentially necessary steroid injection in his back because he has a bad leg, I'm kind of, and by the way, because this is America and my deductible is now spent for the year, but the clock resets on January the 1st. I'm wondering, Brian, what your sort of sense of the state of play is in this sort of battle between people who, like you, who live in the world where they're caring about overall costs for employers and, and thinking about sort of trying to stop quote unquote bad behavior, and what's going on in the world of the ASO players like the Cignas and the Anthems who are being sued and castigated.
I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to have real fireworks. There are a bunch of people lining up to do class action suits against, and somebody's going to do one against a major employer and get a $1 billion settlement, and it's going to put the fear of God into all the self-funded employers. But I was at a meeting a month ago in Pasadena with the Fortune 100 CHROs, and they are. It's mild to say that they're frustrated. They can't get their data. They are hogtied, and they can't use vendors who are not approved by their health plan, and all kinds of other things. And they're beginning to push back. I think if you talk to Lee Lewis at the Health Transformation Alliance, and probably Elizabeth Mitchell, they'll tell you the same things, that the volume is rising, and the natives are getting restless.
Actually, in the Anthem suit, I believe that two of the plaintiffs are employers. So I know we know we've been talking about a class action suit of employees suing their employer for spending too much on their healthcare, basically, and not being fiduciary agents that they have to be now. We have that discussion a couple of times, but a couple of the suits are from employers who can't get the data about the claims they're paying for, which blows my mind. That means someone's writing a check on my bank account, and having said I'm having my house in Tahoe renovated at the moment, the same sort of thing's happening. My contractor says, "Oh, you owe another $7,000 for electricity. What happened?" Well, there was a bunch of stuff, but I mean, but that's kind of, that's kind of the same pattern.
Yeah. I'm working with a guy who's working on decoding a machine readable file that happens to be from Anthem. And this guy is very good. I mean, he's very experienced. He's very sophisticated, and he hasn't been able to get at the data yet. And I mean, the health plans have spent hundreds of millions of dollars locking it down. And I read an article probably a month ago that said nobody has yet been able to consistently break into the machine readable files from the BUCAs.
Actually, I had this exact thing. I tried it because I was getting close to my deductible. So I went to the Blue Cross Blue Shield Massachusetts website, which happens to be my carrier. And I said, can I just download my own claims? And I actually got in a chat with one of their humans, not chatbots. And she said, oh no, the only way you can do this is you have to go to each of the individual EOBs and download the PDF. And so, and I even tried to like screen scrape it and drop into Excel and whatever and see if I could break it up. And that's my own pathetic little attempt to find out about what I'd spent and was I close to my deductible and how much I've been spent and all that kind of stuff. And I tried to get into the API via a couple of the PHR vendors, but apparently and maybe Deven, you can tell me this is right. The regulation says they only have to make it machine readable and available if if you're a Medicare recipient. Is that, or under Medicare or Medicaid? Is that true for the health plans under?
I think so. Yep.
Oh, that is true.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not being requested by a patient, now, again, I don't know Medicare regulations like the back of my hand or conditions of participation, but I don't know that there's any requirement for them to sort of make data usable beyond what they give to the patient.
But the CAA requires that now.
The CAA.
The Consolidated Appropriations Act.
Okay.
Yeah, which it requires that the employer is fiduciary, and that the gag clauses in all the contracts have to go away.
Interesting.
And that brokers and PBMs have to disclose all their sources of revenue.
Wow. So they're being forced to do a transparency report.
Yeah. So the employer must have the data to be able to comply with the reporting requirements.
But when does that go into effect, especially on the plans and the PBMs? Now. That's fascinating. I've had AJ Lecoino, who is the CEO of Capital RX. I've had him on. I had an interview with him the other day, but he was on the session that Jessica and I ran about last year. And he said, and he's a flamethrower, also has much better hair than the rest of us. Well, not better than Deven's, but much longer and better hair than me or Jeff or you, Brian. And he said that the average PBM has 22 separate revenue streams that its customers don't know about. They're charging them fees here, there, everywhere. And I think the level of complexity that especially the PBMs on the health plans have put in between the payer and the provider and this and the other, and is staggering. And I believe the Cigna lawsuit, which is still, I actually got in touch with the people reporting on it. I can't remember who they were to say there'd been an update, because the Cigna lawsuit bizarrely was up in front of. Do you remember there was an assassination attempt on a judge and her son and husband got killed in New Jersey? And I think that was the judge about a couple of 18 months ago or so. That was the judge who is sitting on the Cigna lawsuit. And I think she was, because of family reasons and obviously the murder and what have you, had delayed the case. But I think the same thing was happening, was that that Cigna was essentially being accused of, not found guilty yet, of essentially pocketing the premium, saying they'd paid it out, but then not paying it out, for whatever, under whatever reason they did it, saying that although it should have been paid out by Cigna to the provider, they were actually letting the provider go around, telling the provider to go back and bill the patient. So essentially they were, even though they had gone past the deductible or whatever, I'm not sure those facts are exactly correct. I'm trying to fix it, but certainly, It's somewhat similar to what Anthony's being accused of, is, paying, giving one price to to the employer and actually paying a different one to the provider and pocketing the difference, after they've taken the money out of the employer's account. And this sort of stuff, I'm with you, Brian. This has been going on a very, very long time, and you've got to imagine that at some point, especially if we head into a recession and people start really looking at their bottom lines, it's going to be tricky. Go ahead.
It's astonishing that the CAA was passed at all. It's 92 pages in a 5,700 page bill, so it's buried deeply. But it got past the lobbyists for the health plan industry and the PBM industry, and it's been tested and held up in court. So it looks like it's with us, and it looks to me like it's the most important healthcare legislation since ERISA.
Yeah,
it's a genuinely big deal because it blows open the transparency issue.
Yeah,
and it makes the data flow again. So it could have profound impact.
Yeah.
Wow.
The other area, just to wrap it up and to get it back to me, of course, is, let's face it, it's all about me. It's interesting to see there's a lot of activity now, and I mentioned clinical trials earlier, Deven. I'm full disclosure, I'm consulting with a company called Pluto Health, which is working with both Walmart and Walgreens. The CEO, Joy Bosay, used to work for me at Health 2.0 10 years ago, and now I have to work for her because she's way, way cleverer than I am. Somehow she sold Walgreens. I
like Joy in that company a lot. That's
very good. Somehow she sold both Walgreens and Walmart the same thing. I don't know how that's genius alone, but essentially what they're doing with a lot of is, essentially giving people who show up at those places the right to go and get their data from anywhere else. But I've actually had my stuff go through it. I went back and it found data on me from, that's available now of our API back to like as far away as sort of 2003, 2005. So EMR data was coming in. They do a lot of other clever stuff behind the scenes, and they do a lot of analysis. And but one thing they are helping is with the same problem for clinical trial sponsors. And the thing that's amazing, and they're not alone. There's now a raft of these companies, who are either competing with them directly or indirectly. In fact, one of them is run by another Health 2.0 intern, Particle Health, run by Troy Bannister, which is another guy with great, amazing long hair. No, I'm just jealous about the hair. But anyway, there's a lot of companies out there now who are capable of bringing in data and then doing, and obviously that's kind of becoming a commodity, and that's a real big change. And I bring this up because today, in the last two days, I've had, as you know, with my bad back, I've had 2 visits. Both of them were arranged at last minute, so I managed to get myself shoved into somebody's schedule. And I just wanted to tell you, so the issue here is I have something which normally I've been having physical therapy, and actual physical therapists come to the house and move me around and maybe do exercises and stuff, which is great. But in both cases, I've had a pain management doctor do a telehealth visit. And I think basically with the combination of my personal history, one of them, had no access to my records. I'd sent him a copy of my chart MRI report, but didn't, basically it was just a history I took, and having me walk up and down in front of this, front of this sign, and got the sign in the way, and he said, walk this way and raise your heels and do this, and where's the pain? Pretty much identified where the pain was, where the issue was, and we had a very full and frank discussion about what could be done. And I had a similar thing with a UCSF doctor today. I got, so sorry, Blue Cross Massachusetts, you're paying twice, but a second opinion is always good, which agreed. And this UCSF doctor had the ability to get to see my MRI because the place, the ER it was taken is in Marin County, and it's an affiliated hospital, UCSF. So he could see what I could see on my chart, the report. He also could see the MRI itself. Now, I asked, you can't see that in them. So this is a thing that, Deven, I know you've talked about before. You can't see the MRI in my chart. It was the UCSF system, the actual image isn't there. And I asked nicely, I filled in a PDF, I emailed it to the appropriate people, and they're supposed to send me a CD. And this is now 14 days ago. I've seen there is no CD appearing in my mailbox. So, I would hope that I could get access to this image myself, but I don't know if I will be able to. But I think that was 2 things. One is that the power of just a straight video telemedicine visit under a clinician who can basically get to pretty damn good and get to pretty diagnosis was amazing to me. And then the ability of during the Zoom call of the doctor this morning to basically show me my MRI, draw on it, show me where he felt the problem was, why that, talk about the different techniques he could do to do it within the MRI and the visuals he could share with me. I thought was really tremendous. And I'm almost to the point going, well, do we need to go and see it? These are people who I would have thought you would have had to have seen in person, but apparently, not necessarily. So I was impressed by that. But so Deven, when am I going to get my image?
You should have it already. I would call them because actually California has a more stringent time frame for them to get that to you. It's 15 days is my recollection under California.
And getting me a CD is okay. But when will, UCSF or which insert a big health system here have to deliver the images or the diagnostics, the stuff that's not in the MyChart CCR?
Well, that really gets to when is ONC going to require the connections that electronic medical records make in order to deliver those through a FHIR API or through some sort of endpoint, because it's really the vendor requirements about what's required to be made available through portals and APIs versus what, once it's available technically through that pipe, then another set of requirements kicks in and UCSF will have to open that possibility up. But as long as we, PACS systems being separate from electronic medical records, today the EMR vendors are not required to sort of seamlessly make those available, even to doctors necessarily, even though most of them do because that's customer demand. But in terms of a certification requirement, they're not required to build those pipes. And they would be needed, ONC would need to require them to build that. And I think there's an HL7 effort that is trying to explore how you connect the PACS systems to the electronic medical records so that there can be a seamless flow through APIs, but the tech isn't there yet.
But in your work as Citizen, you were trying to get a lot of, obviously.
Oh, we get images. We get them on CD.
Okay, so same thing. And do you have to, could you ask, or do you have to get the patient to ask,
No, we ask on behalf of the patient, but the other thing I will tell you is that there are image vendors in the same way that there are, record retrieval companies. So there are a number of vendors that they are completely in the image exchange business. And there are some HIEs that also exchange images too. So I think in 2023, some of those under the info blocking rules, some more of those vehicles should open up a bit more, because the idea that an individual doesn't have to pipe in through their portal, but could actually leverage some of these other pipes to get data is going to start to come to fruition in 2023, I think. But in the meantime, you can bug them for your CD. Tell them they're almost up at the state deadline.
I would tell them that I have a very, very vicious and friendly but vicious lawyer from the law firm of Savage McGraw coming after them. Our friend Lucy Savage is I always put Deven and her together because they have such a good name. If the Savage or law firm will get anybody, right? Fantastic. Okay, we're right on the nail here for the end of this. It's been a fascinating session. Thank you, Deven, so much for going through your report. Thanks, Brian, for coming on late and chatting with us about the nasty world of employers and health plan. And thanks, Jeff, for all your comments and bringing up this interesting stuff. We have 20 seconds each to go around. Oh, and now we have guests on the show. We have 20 seconds each to go around and say, what's the next thing you're looking at? So I'll start with you, Jeff.
Looking at the budget reconciliation process that's underway in Congress right now and whether there's going to be a suspension of those PAYGO requirements. It's a big deal for hospitals. It's an even bigger deal for physicians. So there's a whole lot of sort of COVID hangover stuff that got suspended that really would damage the care system if they don't do something about it. So that's what I'm watching.
So, Brian.
I think that AI is the thing to watch in moving all of healthcare forward. It's just a very scary proposition.
Well, I'm trying to get it to replace me, so it's going to start. Deven.
I'm looking for more to come out of HHS around how we put in better protections for reproductive health data in the wake of Dobbs.
Good one.
Yeah, something that's not going to change, especially since the Senate is now back in Democratic control, more firmly Democratic control than it was. The House, of course, is not. So that's going to mean the ability to pass any legislation is going to be extremely limited, even with that extra Senate seat. All right. Well, look, fantastic. I have been, there's been a real whirlwind. You have been listening to the THCB gang. My guests this week were, here we go. Come on. I was hitting that PowerPoint slideshow button here. My guests this week were Jeff Goldsmith from the wilds of Virginia, Brian Klepper from Charlotte, North Carolina, and Deven McGraw back in DC these days, right, Deven?
Yes.
Yes, it was abandoned the West Coast and retreated back to her hometown of DC so she can go and see the University of Maryland Terrapins playing basketball and maybe one day win or lose. We'll see. All right, and then I will be checking in with you all next week. By then we'll know whether I'm unlikely to be called up to play centre forward for England given my bad back, but the World Cup will be grinding closer to its conclusion, so we'll chat about that the way that we didn't really talk about much today. But it'll be December the 18th, 15th. That will be the next show, and I'll have a new gang. So thanks very much for either listening on the podcast or watching live, and we will see you all soon. Thanks a lot indeed for watching and listening. Bye for now.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, Brian.